Hi, guys, and welcome to the Quinn podcast. Here we give you a look through the eyes of the most successful athletes, entertainers, entrepreneurs, and influencers on this planet. Be sure to check out all of the content at quinnpodcast.com. Enjoy the episode.
I read you were a teacher for a while. Let's start with that one. That's an
Yeah.
interesting one.
Yeah, I went to college originally to teach, and that's where I kind of also sort of fell in love with running as something I kind of decided I wanted to do for the rest of my life, or at the time, presumably the rest of my life. But I didn't really have prospects of becoming a professional athlete at the time, so I was looking like through the lens of what do I want to do outside of that, just being kind of a hobby. So I kind of went down that path. Ended up getting dual certified in regular and special education. I taught middle school for a couple of years, high school for a couple of years, and then things on the coaching and the running side started to kind of accelerate to the degree where I sort of had to pick between the two if I wanted to be like as good as I could at either of them. And at the time, I thought was, well, athleticism is something that is probably quite fleeting relative to other careers. So I had to capitalize on that when I could. And then if I want to go back to teaching, I could always do that. So I stepped away from teaching in 2015, I believe, was the last year I taught, and moved out to California for a few years and have sort of been kind of on the training and racing circuit, coaching side of stuff, podcasting things, and all that sort of stuff for the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, that's cool. What was the vision at 16? What did you plan out for yourself?
At what was that?
At like 16, what was the grand vision for your life?
Oh, at 16, I don't think I had any clue what I wanted to do. I was just probably like thinking I would say I was in an exploratory phase at that age where it was more of just I had a lot of curiosity, a lot of interest in different things, but didn't really know like what I was good at, what was going to be motivating for me long term. So I was fortunate that I was kind of in a setting where I was allowed and able to kind of chase after curiosities, variety of different sports, different subject areas, and really kind of consider quite a bit of different options in terms of like career paths and things went. So,
hmm
at that point in time, when I was 16, I think at that age, I'd been running as one of the sports I would do, but it hadn't even become kind of my primary focus until maybe that year where I started to realize, okay, like distance running is probably the sport I'm best at. So if I'm going to give a little more focus into any sort of type of athletics, it would probably be like the longer distance stuff through cross country and track and field, the longer races in that. So um, that was sort of kind of my mindset then. At that point in time, I don't think I had even realized that I was going to go into teaching. I think I was still kind of exploring what I wanted to do from a career standpoint. So even that was sort of up in the air at that point.
Can you remember what it was like, the process of coming to the conclusion that like running specifically was your thing? Because like for me as well, right? There's so many sports back in the days. Um, it just sticks for a reason. What was it
Mhm.
like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was probably two phases. One was when I decided, hey, I'm gonna chase running goals and things like that as a hobby. And that sort of clicked around my sophomore year of college, where I was sort of thrown into a collegiate track and cross country program where a lot of my teammates were more knowledgeable about the sport than I was, in my opinion, and also to some degree had more detailed training specificity from their high school experience than I did. So I really kind of used that opportunity to kind of learn what I loved about the sport outside of just the competition side of things. And that really got me excited about kind of building and making progress and looking at it as a progress of just like how fast can I get at certain races and things like that. I wasn't really even interested in ultra marathons at that point in time. I was loosely aware of them through like a couple of books I had read, but I didn't really have any ambition to do them in the short term at that point in time. So it was more about just kind of racing kind of more traditional Olympic distances and things like that. Um, then when I got into teaching, I
hmm
started racing ultra marathons as well along kind of that same timeline. And I did a race in 2013 called the Desert Solstice Track Invitational. And there I broke an American record and a world record, the American record for 100 miles and the world record for distance run in 12 hours. So that's sort of alongside the sport starting to grow, put me in a position where now I was starting to get some interest from just different publications, different brands and sponsors and things like that. And then people reaching out to see about like if I would be willing to coach them and things like that. So that event probably put me kind of along the trend line of, oh, you know what, there may actually be like a career in this, versus it just being kind of a hobby that I do alongside my other career and passions and things like that. So I sort of sat on that for a few years and continued to compete. And then it was in 2015 where I sort of had an opportunity where all the pieces were in place, where kind of financially, logistically, motivationally, I was ready to kind of take that step into the professionalism side of things with running and put my teaching career on pause at that point and kind of move on to that instead of having trying to juggle too many things at once.
Yeah, no, the 100 miler, you definitely made waves with that one. I remember watching, I think Lex Friedman clip you did 2 or 3 years ago, and I just now realized now that I was reading up on you, like a big chunk of how I train. I remember you broke down the MEV 180 and a bunch of other things. A big part of like the way I train was based on your teaching, so that's pretty cool to sort of trace it back to the source. That was pretty fun. Um, at 30 39 right now, how do you sort of look back on the career, like the phases of it, like how do you puzzle it together?
Yeah, so I would say at this point, like there's a couple things that I think about. One is just I mean, the running world in general has sort of gone through some big shifts. There's been a lot of growth in the ultra running world. So like the ultra running world now versus when I first did it is way more competitive and just a lot more expansive in terms of who's doing it and what disciplines people are even aware of. And people are also starting to, I think, unpack some of the like the rich history in ultra marathon where you can go back to like the 1700s and find 100-mile races and things like that, or you have like this big surge in these 6-day events that occurred in its peak around like the late 1800s, early 1900s and things like that. So the sport's really growing and kind of opening up to just a wider range of what maybe was available or thought to be available when I first got into it. There's my own kind of personal goals too, where I've sort of specialized more in runnable 100 milers over my career. So I think I'm still young enough to kind of try to PR in the 100 mile. I run faster than I have historically. So still kind of focusing on building up for that. One of the big transitions the running world has seen outside of just ultra running has been kind of shoe technology too. So when I broke the world record at the time in 2019 for 100 miles, I was just wearing what I would probably describe as kind of like a lower profile marathon racing flat, where since that time frame to today, we have just a lot more innovation in shoe tech where there's like all these kind of like super specialty foams or premium foams that have a much better energy return than what you're going to get from even like a firm low profile running shoe. So there's a whole world of that exploring, which I'm kind of in the process this year where I'm trying to find like what shoe is going to be the most efficient on my foot versus all the other ones. And that's all an effort to build up to a race that I'll do in June. It's actually at the same venue that I broke the 100-mile world record at the time in 2019. And that's still my fastest 100 miler. So my hope is that I can kind of get a similar training block in place to what I had in that at that year from a fitness standpoint, and then also have a little bit of a better leverage from a technology side of things with the premium shoe foams and things like that, and take a swing at getting a faster 100 miler time this year. So that's kind of where my race ambitions are at this point in time.
No, I like that. What excites you about it, doing it again? Because doing it once is something, right? And then again.
Yeah, I mean, I think what really motivates me with it is I like the building process the most, where it's like, okay, you start coming from an off season and you sort of know with a few different kind of runs and tests kind of where your fitness is at. And then it becomes, okay, I've got this timeline to this event I'm going to do. What are the inputs that I'm going to do to move the needle on my fitness and the adaptations in the direction I want to, so that on race day, I feel like I have the tools to reach the goal I'm going to do. So that process in and of itself is really motivating to me. And the other one just is a little more kind of broad in scope, would just be I want to walk away from the 100-mile distance at some point and just think like, okay, I really got the fastest time I was capable of. And whether that's my current PR or a different one, I'm okay with that. But I want to walk away thinking, okay, I gave that every bit of opportunity I could reasonably do. And, that's what I was able to produce for that distance, so that I have like kind of that life goal of pursuing the fastest 100 mile I can run, um, kind of in my mind, feeling like that was accomplished. So I probably will spend maybe another couple of years or few years, maybe at most, kind of really focusing on that as the primary, and then maybe move into some more longer ultra marathon type stuff, like some 24-hour racing or even multi-day stuff if I get interested in that, because that's kind of a spot of the sport that's gotten a lot more popular in the last few years. And just kind of diving into the history of it's gotten me a little more interested in those than maybe I would have been at earlier in my career.
For sure, man. Yeah, that's cool. Um, what's been the sort of the personal fulfillment side of it? That's like your view on it. For me, for example, I'm 21 right now, right? I think I ran my first marathon at 16, I believe. And I figured out, I'm like, okay, this is something I could do. This is something I'm sort of good at. So I started training for it, and I did it. And I'm like, okay, girls are gonna love me now, but they didn't. They like they didn't give a fuck about any of that. It's funny. So I had to sort of find like internal motivation for it. Um, yeah, what's your view on it? Like the personal fulfillment, what does that feel like to you, and how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting topic because there's a lot of ways to think about it. I think there are like motivators that are useful in the short term, where you want to be mindful of those so that in any given training block or any given pursuit, you have some kind of uniqueness to it. That it's like, okay, I've got this purpose, this motivator, this thing that's going to drive me. But it may be something that's not necessarily like a sustainable input to the degree that it's going to continue to motivate you year after year or decade after decade. So then there's also kind of the side of things where it's like, well, what is your actual kind of core why here in terms of what you're actually trying to explore? And is that something that is going to allow you to both explore and stay interested in it for years and years and years, to the degree that you don't feel like you're losing that edge? Because I mean, I think this is true in all sports, but like the place in the 100 miler, it's like there's like a point in that race where if you don't actually want it for the right reason, it's going to be almost impossible to kind of push through that final layer of just discomfort or monotony or mental fatigue. So you sort of get stripped raw to the degree where like you really recognize, okay, am I here for the right reasons or not? And for me, that's always been kind of just I've always continually been able to go back to kind of what I described before as that sort of building something and kind of getting curious about the inputs, how certain workouts are going to impact my fitness in one direction or the other, what type of fueling strategies are going to optimize me for race day, and then staying excited about those things has been kind of that bigger, more like broad scope thing that's sort of always been there for me and hasn't really waned in any sort of influence in terms of how much it puts on, how much motivation it gives me on race day to really kind of like fully express myself if I can, because that's going to be the best way to sort of highlight, whether those inputs that I spent all that time and energy doing were impactful or not.
What were the motivations back in the day, like when you started versus now?
When I really started, it was like a lot more just sort of regional, in the sense that I just kind of wanted to race. I was just like, okay, at first it was like, okay, maybe I can make the varsity cross country team. And then it was sort of, maybe I can score points on the varsity cross country team. Then it became, okay, now I'm the top runner on our varsity high school cross country team. So how do I, help lead the team to make the state meet, or how do I get to the state meet myself, and things like that. And then it sort of shifted a little bit from that to, in college, the world of running just opened up to me in terms of access to information and different kind of coaching strategies and just like the whys of workouts. So I sort of shifted from just kind of like doing what I was told from a workout standpoint, and then going there on race day assuming like, okay, now we just race, to I want to actually understand why these different like types of workouts do what they do, and why we would put them here versus there. So that became a little bit more of an individual motivator where at that point I was still interested in competing and I wanted to race and I wanted to try to like, beat my teammates or beat my competitors and that sort of thing when I could and try to reach my full potential. But I think the bigger motivator for me there was self-improvement at that point versus just the raw competition of things. And that has sort of stuck for a lot of the ultra running stuff. When I kind of transitioned to ultra running, I did have a much bigger sort of like exposure to national and global type competitiveness and the ability to kind of chase historic records and things like that. So those were the kind of more new motivators that came in that were maybe a little bit different from my college training and focus to where now I sort of had both of those opportunities where I could motivate myself from the internal or from the individual improvement stuff, the curiosity around workout timing and things like that. And then also have this other goal of like, okay, well, there's also this record I could chase, or there's this PR that I have that I could try to beat at this particular event. So, one of the reasons why I've gravitated to more controlled type courses is because they tend to be a little bit more comparable from one year to the next versus doing just a bunch of variety where you're going to different courses all the time or different trails where you might have a really good performance at one and a really good one at the other, but not be able to tell which one was better just because, the times aren't going to be matching in any way because of the course variance and things like that. So I think there's some excitement in that world too. But for me, I think one of the big motivators was being able to see kind of like some of that improvement with kind of controlling some of those environments. So it was a little bit more comparable from one year to the next.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the self-improvement one you mentioned is an interesting one to me personally. Um, what would you say the first time you ran that 100 miler? What was the longest you ran before? You did an ultra before that, like 50?
Yeah, I did. I know I got into the sport by doing a 50 miler, and then I sort of stuck at 50 miles for a while. And then I ended up racing a 50 miler that was, they call them golden ticket races, where if you finish in the top two, or there's a few that are top three, but if you finish in most of them is top two, you get this entry into this really kind of competitive big trail ultra marathon called the Western States 100. So
Hmm.
in 2012, I ended up winning a 50 miler that was one of those events. And I actually didn't have any interest in doing 100 miles yet at that point. I assumed I would eventually get to that, but it wasn't something that was on my radar at the time. So it took me a few days to kind of get talked into saying, all right, I'll just go and do that race. So I took that and I went over, I was still living in Wisconsin at the time. So I went over to California to do that race in June of 2012. And that was my first 100 miler. So it wasn't until the following year that I was really aware of some of these really controlled, flat, fast type of courses, like what you get at the Desert Solstice Track Invitational, which is literally a 400-meter high school track. So in terms of
Hmm.
controlled, flat, runnable surfaces, that's about as clear as it gets with it. So that was sort of an eye-opening experience for me because it allowed me to see just like the difference in terms of what you're able to do on a course that you're able to optimally prepare for versus a course that is sort of different from what you have access to in training. So for me, heading out to California to do races in the mountains was just going to be a different animal training in Wisconsin than hopping on a 400-meter track or something I had access to on an almost daily basis if I wanted to and really be able to optimize the specificity of the course when training.
How many 100 miles did you do before the world record, you think?
Before the world record, I would have probably done maybe, I think like seven or eight.
Okay.
Um, Before the one I did in 2013, I'd only done one complete 100 miler. So when I broke the American record for 100 and the world record for 12 hours in 2013, I'd only had one full 100-mile experience at that point in time. So I was still pretty new to the distance.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's funny. What does it feel like to be like the best at something? To go to bed at night and be like, there's no one in the world ever that did what I did.
Yeah, I would say, it's definitely it definitely feels good. Like there's definitely like a sense of accomplishment there too. Like, like you said, to be able to say, wow, I just did something that no other human has recorded, in terms of, the pace at which you're running 100 miles. I would say like though that sort of fulfillment is somewhat fleeting though, because it's rewarding. It's cool to see that you did it, but the record itself, I don't find a whole lot of gratification from it because inevitably it's just going to be something where either you're going to run faster or someone else is going to run faster. So at some point you have to move on from that, right? It can't be something
Hmm.
that you live within in a way that is brings fulfillment, in my opinion. I think if you find yourself sitting there and thinking, all right, I've got this record, now I have to do everything I can to preserve it or cheer against other people from trying to break it, that just feels like a way of like inviting a lot of negativity into just your mindset and your existence and just your attitude towards the sport growth as a whole. So my thought was always when I broke those records was, you know, at some point someone's going to come along and run this faster than me, or at some point this sport's going to grow to a point where this type of part of it gets really popular and people are going to be running fast times all over the place. And I want to be part of that to the degree where I can be kind of a useful person in helping people experience that at a higher level than I did, or have access to better information and better resources when they kind of go through training and racing, those type of things, so that I can kind of continue to contribute to the sport for years to come versus just being like, someone who was there, did that, got upset when someone broke their record, and then, kind of ended up kind of creating kind of more of a negative environment versus a positive one.
Yeah, probably a healthier way of dealing with it. That's for sure. It's just
Yeah.
there are certain records that shouldn't be broken, in my opinion. It's like it's like the James Lawrence ones, for example. The 100 Ironmans, like 100 days. Like that's such a tough thing to do, and then some guy does like 120 in 120 days. It's like, what's the point? Like
I think with
let him have
some,
that.
yeah, I think with some, it's just like it's sort of a thing where obviously it's really hard to do that. Like there's a ton of physical and mental like pain and suffering and dedication that goes into doing something like that. But it's also like how many people have the opportunity to even consider doing something like that too? So there is that side of it where you're sort of like by the time you get to even starting something like that, you're down to a very select few of people who could even reasonably consider it. And
Sure.
and I think I don't have a problem with that sort of thing. And I guess maybe this is where I would be different than yours. I think most records are worth kind of chasing and getting broken because they sort of end up introducing new things where like when if someone breaks a record, chances are that they probably innovated in some way. Maybe it wasn't like a total departure from what the prior person did, but they probably did something slightly different that maybe allowed for them to go a little bit further. And I think those sort of things open up the opportunity for the sport to kind of grow and more information to be available for it versus us kind of getting into a rut of like, okay, this is how you do this. And if you don't do it this way, you're not going to be successful. So you kind of break some of these like you can break some long-standing like assumptions
Mm.
that are maybe not necessarily ironclad to the degree that we should be absolutist about them. And I find that to be maybe one of the more exciting things when records go down is like, what did we learn? How did we do it differently this time? And, what does this person who's probably unique from the prior person have to share about their experience that we can learn from as well and kind of continue to add to that pile of resources for people who are either doing it casually or for record chasing.
Yeah, area for sure. Um, you say you feel like you can still be faster. What's
Yeah.
what would perfection look like? How fast could you go on the 100 miles?
Um, I mean, I think I can go under 11 hours. So that's kind of like
Nice.
a higher tier goal of mine. I think I can go faster than I have gone. So then the question becomes how much faster and can I close that 19-minute gap between my current PR and what would be required to break 11 hours? There's just something cool about I think about saying, okay, I got under 11 hours versus just PRing. So in the back of my mind, I kind of have that as like, all right, if I can get myself to a level of fitness where, um, you know, breaking 11 hours requires essentially like a 6:35 roughly minute per mile pace. So if I can get to a point where I've done enough long runs where that pace feels like it's sustainable to do for 100 miles and I can put that on a pacing cart strategy and go after it, I think that'd be really fun. and exciting to do. And I don't think I don't think there's anything physiologically demanding about it that I wouldn't be able to do. It just comes down to execution on race day and having the right fitness going into it. So, in terms of perfection with 100 milers, I've sort of wrestled with this question because I don't know that there's necessarily a perfect 100-mile execution because it's just so long. I think there's going to be something that goes wrong that you could always say, hey, if I could do that just slightly differently, I'd be a little bit faster. I think that's always going to be there. So then it just becomes more of a process of minimizing those down to such a small degree that you're able to get as far as you can or as fast as you can at that distance. So when I'm deciding on like, is there a goal achievable or not, I'm usually looking at it through that lens of if I'm going into this race, here's an example. If I'm going to this 100 mile and in order to get a specific time I'm targeting, it requires me to never stop running. Like the entire time, just be running. That's probably unreasonable because you're typically gonna have to maybe stop once or twice, even if it's just to use the bathroom real quick or something like that. So if you're building like a goal that requires that level of perfection, it's just maybe not available within the sport that we're doing. So you have to be kind of reasonable with like just sort of things like that that are going to pop up. And some of it's not something you predict. That's um, a little more predictable. It's just like you probably know there's going to be a spot where you feel less motivated, less positive, and you're running some slower splits. So I think it's more about tightening those up so that when those come, they don't last long, or if they come that you can kind of get past them and eventually go faster or get back on track quicker than you would otherwise. So I think it's more about just optimizing within a framework that's likely not going to look absolutely perfect on paper. Um, I guess maybe the way I would look at it too is be like a race that maybe looks perfect on paper probably is a race that left something on the table. Because if it's able to be controlled to that degree, chances are you didn't reach to the edges of what your potential would be. That's maybe the way I would look at that.
What would be the biggest difference between 2019 and the next attempt? Maybe more, I don't know, tech wise or something.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually know the guys who do a lot of the efficiency testing on the new shoe foams and things like that. So I've asked them just about like, okay, what could I expect from the shoe I wore versus some of the top tier models that are out right now? And I mean, the estimations are pretty broad because it just depends on one, how you respond to the foam, and then two, we are extrapolating to some degree as to how impactful they will be at say mile 80 versus if I hop on a treadmill and do an efficiency test in them. So we are playing some guessing games there, but I mean, I've been given data on like anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes in terms of what I could likely expect from the shoe that I ran in versus what is available now. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to I have that pair of shoes that I wore at that race. I only wore them once for that race. And I'm going to take that shoe, and I'm going to take a handful of other models that I think are going to be good options or potential options for me, and I'm going to go into the lab and I'm going to test the efficiency of that shoe I wore in 2019 and then compare that to the efficiency that I get from some of these new premium foam shoes and then start running the numbers to kind of get an idea of like what can I maybe expect with an exact same performance but just with this shoe versus that shoe, how much time can I expect? And then that might give me a little bit more insight into what position I need to be in fitness wise to kind of hit some of those goals that I have for that day or how realistic some of them are.
Yeah, that's exciting. So then training, the MEF 180 you explained on Lex Fridman. It was, I don't know, it hit for some reason. How do you approach training right now? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, for training for me, the way I look at it is I think like one maybe universal truth for most endurance athletes, almost independent of whether they're going to be doing something shorter like a 5K or something longer like 100 miles, is you want a really strong kind of foundation to build whatever you're going to do next off of. So I think some of that like math 180 type training is really good at establishing that foundation. Or the way I describe it is if I have someone who comes to me and they're like, hey, I want to work on improving my performance. One of the things we do first is we look at how much time they have available to train. So if that person says, I have 10 hours to train, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to maximize that 10 hours with some of that kind of like zone two, or I call base training, which would kind of match up with that math 180 formula for a lot of people.
Hmm.
we're going to maximize the volume they have available at that intensity and see where we can get their pace at it. Once we're there, we've kind of laid the foundation within the framework that they have available to them. Then we just want to try to shift that framework up. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to introduce some moderate and higher intensity work at like short and long intervals. So I like to focus on kind of two intensities there to do that. One is what we would call like your lactate threshold, or for most people, it'd be like an intensity that they could do for, if they've been a runner for a while, probably for like 60 minutes in a race day setting. But if they're kind of new to that or haven't done speed work in the past, it might be a little shorter than that or closer to maybe even 30 minutes. But we're going to try to work on that intensity. And we're also going to try to work on an intensity that is even higher than that, which is like where they're what we would call your velocity at VO2 max, or the pace that you run at your VO2 max, which is just like the top end of that aerobic intensity spectrum. So the way I'll approach that is we'll do like short intervals where we'll figure out through like either a race or like a time trial that's around 12 minutes in duration about how fast that would be for that person. And we're going to start doing some of those long and short intervals in their training in order to kind of pull up that whole foundation. Once we've done that, we start looking at, well, what is specifically required for the race you're doing? So if that person's doing a 100-miler like me, we're going to start looking at, well, what pace are we going to be targeting at that event in order to get the goal you're trying to get? And we're going to start kind of shifting a lot of training load towards that sort of input. So if they're doing a flat track 100 like I am, and they're running, you know, in that kind of 7-minute mile pace or faster like I am, then we're going to do a lot of work at that intensity. And we're going to kind of shift some of that other stuff to like preserve versus build on, and focus on really developing what exactly they'll be doing on race day. Or if they're doing something like, say, a mountainous 100-miler and their goal is to break 24 hours, we're going to try to work on the specifics that they're going to be doing for those 24 hours at the intensity they'll be doing it, with the different fueling strategies they're going to use, practicing with their gear and things like that, and really shifting a lot of the training load towards that, and just focusing on maybe preserving versus building some of those other inputs. Because the interesting thing about endurance training as a whole is it's a lot easier to preserve something than it is to get it. So if we
Hmm.
do our homework before the specificity phase and we acquire the fitness we want, we can really pull back on how much of it we do in order to keep it where it's at. And what that does is it frees up training load in order to do other things that are going to be maybe more specific to what you're actually trying to do on race day. So that's kind of the specificity phase, where depending on the distance and the intensity that they're going to be racing at will depend on kind of what that phase looks like.
People tell me that all the time. That's an interesting one. I don't understand it. Race specific and like base training. I understand base training, but race specific in what sense? Like,
Yeah, so it just basically is kind of the endpoint of whatever they're doing. So if they're doing any event, let's say they're doing a 5K, the 5K is a shorter endurance event relative to ultra marathon, so they're going to be running it at a much higher intensity. You know, some of the fastest people in the world are going to be doing their 5K like almost at their VO2 max. So for them, race day specificity is going to be intensities, you know, close to those short intervals that I talked about. Whereas let's say someone's doing a marathon and they're trying to break 3 hours, they're probably going to be at an intensity there that falls somewhere between kind of their base pace or their like zone 2 intensity and their lactate threshold. So that intensity they could do for like 60 minutes or so. So for them, race day specificity training is going to be some pace or some intensity in between those two. So it just requires us to maybe input that pacing strategy or that intensity into their training. So they're actually working on what they'll be doing when they're out there on race day. So basically, the way you figure that one out is you look at the event you're doing, and then you try to get a realistic estimation of what the intensity or the pacing is going to be required for that. And then you build the workouts around that to make sure that you're doing the things you'll actually be doing on race day to a high enough degree that your body is comfortable and used to doing it and making adaptations that are more specific to it.
right. What are the KPIs like when you're out on the road? What are the main KPIs for you? Is it just heart rate? Is it what do you look at the
Oh,
metric?
I like all these things as tools. So then it becomes just a question of which tool am I using to sort of guide the session, and which tools am I using to maybe support that guidance or use as post-workout analysis. So my goal is always to optimize perceived effort to become my primary guide for both workouts and racing. And then I'm going to use things like heart rate and pace as sort of secondary measures in order to support where I'm at there. So let's say, for example, I want to find out like where I'm currently at for my maximum aerobic function. I'm going to go out and I'm going to run at that intensity because I know what that feels like after years and years of doing it. And really the only thing after that to consider is what does the data say about that? So if I run that intensity is the same today as it was 10 years ago. The difference is how fast I can do it and what my heart rate shows up at for that intensity. Although the heart rate and the perceived effort are likely going to correlate pretty closely, where as the intensity goes up, the heart rate goes up. So what I'll do then is I'll go and I'll look at that data afterwards. And if it's something where it's like, okay, I'm 30 seconds per mile slower at that intensity and heart rate compared to where I was when I had that really optimized earlier last year or something like that, what that tells me is I need to work on that and improve it to try to get it back to where it would be before I would likely be in a spot where it's time to like move on from building on that versus preserving it. So the way I like to describe it is intensity is fixed. That's going to remain the same. If I send someone out for like a zone 2 MAF base run, whatever you want to call it, that's going to feel the same basically at the beginning and the end of the training plan. If I send someone out for short intervals or long intervals, that's going to feel the same at the beginning as it does at the end. What's going to change is the pace at which they're able to do those things at. So what we want to see over time is that you're getting faster at the same intensity. So you're getting more gain essentially for the input that you are doing. And that's kind of like the whole zoom out goal of what I like to do, both training for myself and coaching.
My next Ironman in August, I run like a 10K in 45 minutes. After my Ironman, I want to do my first 100 miler. Well, how would you approach that coming out of that race, transitioning to ultra?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I find that when you do events like that, like the 10K or even Ironman in this scenario, is the inputs that you did to get to those two goals are likely going to be somewhat similar to some of like the speed work development that I would do leading into the specificity phase for a 100 miler. So if you're doing like speed work to get faster at the 10K or speed work to get faster, speed work and volume probably to get better at like the Ironman, then there's a good chance that you've maximized or at least really built those inputs. So then the next thing becomes, well, what do you do with that? Like you're probably pretty fit at the end of that. So then it becomes, well, now how do I take that fitness and really mold it into what is going to be useful for that next goal? And if that next goal is a 100-mile race, then you're probably in a pretty good position to just start working on specificity stuff depending on the timeline. So you might look at that as like, okay, I spent, a good portion of the year working on some speed work and building some volume and things like that to prepare for the 10K and the Ironman. So when I finish the Ironman, I'm going to recover from that. Then I'm going to still do some of those things, but maybe do them at a lower input frequency in order to have enough time, energy, and training load capacity to be able to work on the specifics that you're going to be doing to be able to complete the 100 miler at the time and pace and intensity that you plan to do that at. So a lot of these things are based on timeline, because if you said like, oh, okay, I got the Ironman in August, but then by the time I do the 100 miler, it's going to be the following year in August. Well, then you have like a ton of time. So it's probably too early to get specific. You would be better off probably just doing some different stuff for a while before you kind of got into the specifics of the 100 miler. But if you were like, okay, I'm going to finish the Ironman in August, and then by December, I want to do the 100 miler, that would be a scenario in which your number one goal after Ironman is first, fully recover, then two, spend those couple months before December to really kind of be doing the specific things that you'd want to be doing for that 100 miler in those months leading into it.
What's a good time frame? I think I'm just gonna do like trek solo. It's more like the mental part of it, probably. I'm just sort of scared of it.
For the 100 mile?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just one of those things where you get into it and there's always a point where there's no way of avoiding this from my experience. There's going to be a point where your mind is essentially going to tell you you can't do this, and you're going to start considering that to be the case. And really the best 100-mile races tend to be the amount of times you're able to push through that block. So when people go into a 100-miler thinking, okay, I'm just going to be like laser focused this entire time, I find that to be a very risky way to do it, because then if you get to a point where you're not laser focused and you're just unrecognizable mentally to where you were going into the race in terms of what you expected, that can be really hard to digest because you're being presented with something that you didn't anticipate, versus a scenario where you know going in, hey, at some point I'm going to be at this crossroad and my mind's going to be like, you can't do this. You need to stop. You need to slow down. You need to drop out, whatever. And when that point comes, I need to be armed with some tools to encourage myself to reverse that into a positive mindset so that I can keep going. And I think there's a lot of power in just knowing that that is going to happen, so that when it does, you don't get caught off guard by it. You don't think like, why is this happening to me? It must be over. Everyone else is having a great time and reaching their goals and I'm failing. You're thinking, oh, everyone else is going to experience this too, regardless of whether they finish or don't finish. This is my time to experience it and my time to kind of get through this phase. And then when you do get to it, I think you just have a lot more of a lot higher likelihood of getting through that, because you're not looking at it through as something that is not going to happen, but it's something that will at a certain point, and you just need to be ready to tackle it when it does.
So how long should I go after August? How many months should I aim for?
How long should you wait to do the 100-miler?
Yeah. How long should I train after like when you're fit for an Ironman? Like how much longer does it take to get ready
Yeah,
for a 100-miler?
it's really going to probably be more about recovery. It's going to probably be like, let's say, for example, after 2 weeks after the Ironman, you were like, I feel great. I feel like I'm totally recovered. I'm ready. I'm excited to get back into training. If that's the case, you could probably get ready for the 100-mile in like 6 to 8 weeks.
Hmm.
Just like if it's your first one, you might want a little bit more time just so you have some opportunity to make some mistakes and play around with some things. But really, you're just looking at 100-mile specificity at that point. If you get done with the Ironman and you're like, all right, man, that took everything out of me. This is going to take me like 4, 5, 6 weeks to really even feel mentally ready to consider doing a 100-miler, then you're just going to want more time. And then if you need more time, you're more likely to let some of those training adaptations lapse while you're recovering mentally and physically, which just means you might need a little bit more time to kind of reintroduce those before getting into the 100-mile specific stuff. So in that scenario, it might be better off to be say like, okay, I'm going to pick a 100-miler say in March of the following year, so that I can sort of relax, let my mind and body rest for 4 to 6 weeks. Not that you're not training at all there, you're just not like running yourself to the same degree that you would in some of your other buildups. And then you have a little bit better of a timeline to kind of reintroduce those things, get back to where you were going into that Ironman, and then input kind of those 100-mile specific training for, 6 to 8 weeks or so leading into the race later on.
Yeah, I saw you had a bunch of coaching plans on the side. You have a run group as well. Maybe take like the audience through that, what you're doing on that side, and then tell me how to get involved in that, because I definitely want you to coach me in the 100-miler.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a variety of options for coaching. It's sort of set up so that there's options for everyone who wants very little guidance from me but wants to follow my philosophy. Those folks tend to do well with some of my pre-made plans that sort of are built out towards what I talked about from a specificity standpoint. There's folks who want to work with me one-on-one and have me actually do the programming for them and hop on calls and talk with them, respond to emails and texts and things like that. So they tend to do a little bit better with one of my one-on-one coaching packages. And then one of my more exciting, in my opinion, coaching options right now is my group coaching. So it's just a group of people where we're all training for something different. So what happens when they sign up for that is they get one of the plans that I've got pre-made towards whatever they're training for. And then weekly we get on a call and we all just kind of like share what we're doing in training, what our questions are. Since those plans are static, we adjust them to make them more individual for the person, and we just kind of work as a team towards all of our goals through kind of like a group online atmosphere. Um, so that's another one that's I think is a lot of fun, because it doesn't feel like you're just at it yourself and be told what to do by me. We have a group of people that kind of all kind of shares their experiences, their wins, their challenges, I think you learn a lot too, because a lot of times people have questions that they just don't know. So then, like, say when one group member asks something and then I answer it, a lot of the group members think, "Oh, you know what? I didn't even consider that, but that I'm going to benefit from that piece of information too." Or someone asks for a specific plan adjustment and I explain why, it can trigger in one of the other group members, "Oh, you know what? I was just following this plan as is and didn't realize that maybe I need an adjustment too that would be better for me." And then they kind of like access that ability to ask the question the way that would be useful in order for me to adjust their plan to be able to just have a little bit more specific individual strategy for them versus what we would maybe see in the norm.
Yeah. How do I get involved? What would you do if you were me? With
I
what I
would,
just told you about the plans.
yeah, yeah. Well, it might just depend on kind of what level of support. So, um, if you're thinking like, hey, I really want a lot of support, one of my one-on-one grouping, like individual sport, either the one-on-one or group coaching tends to work better. Um, the group is pretty small right now. I don't have like tons and tons of people in there, so there's a lot of access to me and the other group members during those weekly meetings. So if folks are looking to kind of get a lot of individual stuff within that framework, it's currently at that spot. But if it is something where you're like, hey, I would rather you just put a program online for me that I can follow or load up to my watch and then ask you questions through text or email whenever I want and get on a call either weekly or bi-weekly, depending on which plan tier you're signed up for, and we can go over everything and discuss things where it's just you and me, then the one-on-one tends to work better. So sometimes it might just be personality, where some people are just a little more like eccentric and they want to have that group there. They want to engage with a bunch of people and learn as a group, whereas other people are maybe a little more introverted and they're just like, hey, I want to just kind of talk specifically to you and not maybe engage in a group setting like that. So I think personality drives a lot of that stuff, in terms of the framework that works best for any individual.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll have to let you know. That's exciting. That's fun. I like that. Um, Injury prevention. That's one. How do you not get injured? I read you didn't get injured since like college or something.
Yeah, unfortunately, that was I've had a really good run of very little injury issues for most of my ultra running career. I have had injuries though, in the last few years that have been made it difficult to run like race at a high level year to year, like all around the year and all that stuff. So injuries are something where like it's probably not something you should look at as I'm never going to get an injury or what do I do to never get an injury? I think it's more about how do you recognize when you're starting to get an injury so you don't turn it into a full-blown one. And unfortunately, most runners have to kind of learn that the hard way because it's really hard to recognize some of that stuff without experiencing it. So, like, I mean, we've got great physical therapists who really know how to manage injuries and injury prevention, and they still get injured sometimes. So, some of it's just kind of like a reality of pushing your body and reaching for kind of higher tier goals is that that's something that could potentially happen. So, the way I usually look at it is like, well, how do we manage that when it does? So one thing I like to tell people is like the better timeline you can give yourself, the easier it's going to be to manage that. So what I mean by that is like if someone has a race they want to do, but their timeline is really tight, where they're barely got enough time to prepare for it, then it's a little riskier because they're probably going to feel a little more rushed in their training. They're probably likely to take some more risk as they wouldn't do. And if they do get injured, then there's a huge opportunity cost there because they don't really have any buffer versus someone who has a really generous timeline. They're going to be more likely to kind of take things a little more conservatively if they need to. If they recognize something's not feeling great, they have the flexibility to say, okay, I'm not going to force this workout today. I'm going to wait and do it a couple days later and just make sure my body is really feeling ready for it. So timeline's a big one. And then it's just like when you do start feeling things feel different or feel off, a lot of times we're dealing with soft tissue stuff. So soft tissue injuries tend to be things where you want to reduce the loading to it, but you don't want to eliminate the loading to it because eliminating the loading to it actually probably prolongs the injury or the discomfort. but doing too much also will potentially aggravate it further and make it worse. So the way I usually describe that is once you notice something, you want to reduce training or reduce loading to that area, because sometimes you can reduce loading to an area with some sort of a device like an orthotic or a brace or something where you're going to temporarily use that to keep that area from working as hard so you can still push the rest of your body, but not that one spot that's falling behind. But at the end of the day, you want to reduce the loading to that area so that if it's soft tissue, like kind of a general rule of thumb is like if it's a discomfort of maybe a 3 out of 10, then you're probably heading in the right direction, but don't let it flare up beyond that. But also, as soon as you start noticing that stuff, take inventory as to when it's bothering you. Because a lot of times with injuries, they feel better once you start working out because your body warms up, your body loosens, all of a sudden they feel great, and you're out there running. You're like, this is awesome. The injury's gone. And then you wake up the next morning and it's just like throbbing. It's like way worse. So you want to pick the point of day or the time that it is at its worst and use that as a progress monitoring point. So as you're doing different things, just keep checking in on that spot. So for example, if let's say I injure my foot and it really hurts in the morning, but it loosens up over the course of the day and it feels its best like when I'm moving around. And then I wake up the next morning, it's at its worst, and I sort of repeat that process. Well, my progress monitoring point for that is going to be in the morning when I wake up. I want to see that improve versus stagnate or regress. So if it's stagnating or regressing, that means I'm loading it too much. I need to back off of that and give it a little bit of extra time to kind of catch up. If it's improving, if it's getting a little bit better each day when I monitor how it's doing, then I know that the loading is adequate to allow it to heal and get back to 100%. So that's kind of the way I like to look at injuries. Don't look at them as something that you're never going to get one, or is that there's like this perfect strategy to avoid them altogether. Look at them as like just be mindful that they are something that likely happens, and the sooner you catch it, the more proactive you can be and the less time it's going to cost you, to the degree where if you notice them early, sometimes it's just like, oh, I just need an extra rest day, or I just need to kind of back off for a few days versus, okay, I ignored this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and now I've got like something that's going to take me weeks or months to kind of get over.
Got it. Clear. Have you thought about what life's going to be like after running? Because I feel like with the mental toughness you developed, you could be like president or something.
I don't know that I want that responsibility, but I do think about that. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I've stayed curious in things outside of just the training and racing side is because I know that I have other interests and passions, and I want to have something there that I can look forward to, both while I'm, in different phases of training and racing, but also like when I'm maybe no longer interested in competing at the same level as I am today. So, I like to think that I'll be involved in the sport as a participant, even when I'm no longer running as fast as I am, to still get that sort of fulfillment of like, okay, I put in hard work and now I'm going to do this event kind of as a celebration, hang out with the rest of the runners and the community as a whole. But, like the coaching side of things, the podcasting side of stuff, like the online content, that sort of stuff is exciting to me and motivating too. So like when I'm at a point where maybe training and peaking for races is not as important as it is now, I can slide one of those things into kind of that driver's seat of helping other people try to get to that point in their training and racing, or giving more good content for people on podcast episodes or online on Instagram and X and places like that, where there's oftentimes a lot of people that are kind of in that journey trying to figure out what's going to work best and sort of like shift more towards those things.
Thanks for listening to the Quinn Podcast. If you enjoyed it, you can go to quinnpodcast.com to check out all of the previous episodes. quinnpodcast.com.